Hi, everyone. I am Gwen Callahan, one of the festival directors for Portland Horror Film Festival. This is our eighth annual event, and I am joined today by the directors of the documentary Satan Wants You, Sean Horler and Steve J. Adams. Welcome.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. Um, with this with this documentary, this is not your first documentary. You guys have documentaries on a variety of subjects. And I'm wondering what draws you to the stories that you've decided to tell?
Oh, 100% the people in the documentary. So the participants, as always starts for me. It's their stories that we're telling and bringing to life on screen. And once you find that magic person who is going to say yes, hey, I'm going to open up my life to you, and you can put it on film. That's like the starting place of something that's really magic.
And
Uh,
Steve, for
sorry.
you as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking for stories that kind of like reflect back to us where we are in the world. What we can learn from the stories that we tell people around us and the stories that we tell ourselves. We're always looking for like Sean said, those characters that have these amazing backgrounds that we want to find out more about.
Okay. When did you start making documentaries?
If we tell you the year, you're going to know how old we are. So do we have to? A long
Well,
time ago.
okay. People can Google search you, but how many documentary films have you made? I'm just curious.
We've made two feature films, and then altogether, I think we've done about 20 shorts.
Okay, wow. So you are experienced at this. Um, do you feel like all of that experience served you really well with making Satan Wants You?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
this film, I don't think, like how many years, 12 years ago when Steve and I started doing this, I told you after all, I don't think we could have done a film like this at the beginning of our career. This is definitely like for us, like we have been making short films, and even our last feature, all of those films put us into a position to do this story in the sort of the way that we both pictured in our heads, the way that we talked about, and to actually bring it to life and say, oh yeah, this is exactly what we wanted to do. Is, here we are in that part of our career. It's really, really rewarding.
Nice. And so what about the story of so Satan Wants You is kind of a deep dive into the memoir Michelle remembers and kind of peeling back the layers of everything that surrounded that memoir, which touched off the Satanic Panic of the 80s. So my question is, what drew you to telling this particular story now?
Well, I
You want to
mean,
start?
yeah, I can start for sure. In 2018, we were working on a different project. We were working on a project about books and authors in BC, and in our research, we got about 100 books, and midway through, there was the book Michelle Remembers. I had never heard of it. I didn't know that this book was written in BC, specifically on Vancouver Island, Victoria. But I looked at Sean, and Sean looked at it, and he was like, "Oh God, this book!" And Sean knew all about the book.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Victoria right after the book was published. So this for me, it's like the ultimate boogeyman from my childhood, right? Like they were Michelle Smith and Larry Pazder, the two authors who were patient and doctor in Michelle Remembers. They were everywhere when I was growing up. They lived 10 minutes down the road from my family in a big house by the ocean. They're on, the radio, they're on TV, they're in the newspaper for years and years and years and years. So it's like everyone in town knew about this. And that's one thing when you're a kid, because like life happened. I forgot all about this story. And then when we it came across into our lives again in 2018, it was like, oh wow, this has actually impacted, this book from Victoria, British Columbia, has impacted millions and millions and millions of people around the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna reveal my age now, to age myself. But I remember when this came out in the 80s. I was pretty young, but I remember it, and I remember classmates like talking about it and talking about the recovered memories and satanic cults and everything, and that just became such, it just captured everyone's imagination so strongly. What I'm curious because you grew up in that the kind of the nexus of where it all happened. Did that really like strike you and like what am I trying to say? Did that really like influence every part of life for a while? Like you said it was everywhere, but what in your experience as a kid growing up with that, like what was your takeaway from having that all around you?
There's tons. I mean, so my experience in Victoria, I should say, happened everywhere, right? When this spread. But this is, the classic Satanic Panic stuff, like people wearing black clothes or Satanists, look out for them. You're going to be stolen from the street. There were, vandalism and graffiti in the graveyard that's featured in the book and in our film. There were certain stores downtown in Victoria that allegedly had altars where children and animals were sacrificed. Like people took this really seriously. And then you sort of saw what happened in Victoria. I should also say, like, there was even a rumor at one point that babies were going to be stolen from the local hospital, and police guards were posted and patrolling. And there's a whole like TV news interviewing mothers with newborn babies afraid that their kids are going to get snatched and murdered. Like it's funny to look back from now and be like, oh, well, that's just ridiculous. But at the time, people thought this was real and really, really, really worried about it.
I mean, it was on Oprah, right? Like, and all the like the major network talk
It was
shows and
everywhere.
like everywhere. And we didn't have the internet back then, so it was harder to fact check.
Yeah.
I remember this too, like D&D, if you play D&D, that's like a gateway to satanic worship. And if you lived in, yeah, I was a goth as a teenager. Still am, not a phase. Um, and that was, like, oh my God, watch out. Like, certain of my friends' parents were very like concerned about them hanging out with me until they discovered I was Asian and an A+ student. So and then it was okay. But it really kind of was a modern day witch hunt.
Mhm.
The thing you said, like, since we didn't have the internet, we weren't able to fact check as much. The thing about it though, and I think the thing that really drew us to the story was it was 2018 and we saw that QAnon was happening and Pizzagate was happening. So there were these rumors that there were these politicians that were stealing babies. And they had these like specific, like, like a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. And that's where they like a gunman went in to find the kids and try to free them. And the internet was around, like you could fact check this, you could find that all out, but it's still like that was kind of the impetus where we were like, okay, so this story is directly relevant to the time we're living in right now, and that's when we really knew that we wanted to tell this.
Okay, interesting. So when you decided to dive down into the background of this book and kind of like getting into it, did you find what you were expecting to find? How did you approach kind of just like getting in touch with all these people and getting them to go on record on camera with you?
I mean, you read the book, right? So the book in itself is something that, like millions of people have experienced and they still will now in the future, thanks to this film. There's a part of the book where there's acknowledgments in the back, and then it is a true story, right? So all the characters that are included in the book are real people. And that's like definitely the starting place, or was the starting place for us, is to go through and start contacting the people from the book. And in this case, it's, there were, you have some certain expectations going into this being like, oh yeah, this is really a crazy story. It is like layers upon layers of insanity. But then when we reached out to the family and sort of had done all of that research, the family members of Michelle and Larry, it became clear that they had never gone on the public record to speak about this and weren't given the opportunity at the time or didn't want to during the 80s and 90s. And like specifically Larry Pazder, the psychiatrist, his ex-wife Mary Lynn, like we called her and it took so digging to find out where she was, and it's a landline telephone, all these things to actually track her down after all these years. And it was like no time had passed. It was literally like 40 days or 40 years ago, and she just recited everything from start to finish like it happened yesterday. It was, yeah, and it's understandable because it's such a, for her, for other people who were victims of the Satanic Panic, this is something that changed people's lives in a way that's hard to comprehend if you didn't live through it. And it was such an honor for Steve and I to actually have a platform to finally share the other side of this story that everyone thinks they know, and really introduce some new conversation into the Michelle Remembers lore.
And that's kind of the thing too, right? It was like the people that were involved, like the family members and the people that were accused, like this took up like over 10 years of their lives. So it was like a big part of their lives. So being able to actually like ask them if they wanted to come on camera and talk about it, it was like a cathartic moment for them, because they actually got to speak their side. And like Sean said, like they had never spoken about it. Nobody had asked them to go on record and tell them their side. So we found it really privileged, and we it was just like a really great experience to be able to work with all those people and actually hear what really happened.
And so Larry Pazder has passed away, but Michelle Smith is still around. And were you able to get in contact with her at all?
We reached out twice, and she declined to participate and made it quite clear that she wanted nothing to do with the film.
Okay, interesting. That's interesting. I think it's interesting how in a documentary like that in itself is says something. Yeah.
Well, I think it's like, again, it's like, do you want to rehash this past that I mean, she's never recanted. She's never come forward to say this wasn't true or this didn't happen. And I think at this point in her life, she's around 72, 73 years old. So it's like, is this something that she really wants to like walk down and delve into again? I can understand her saying no. But it really would have been interesting to hear what she thought.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's really interesting to me in the part of the documentary where Larry's wife, Lynn, just calls up the school, like does a little fact checking of her own. Um, and did that happen? What's the timeline of when that happened? Do you
I
know?
mean, for them, it's basically there's Mary Lynn, who was investigating this in Victoria, and she collected everything she could connected to this book, to the Satanic Panic, and also to multiple personality disorder. She has 5 binders that she's kept over the years of newspaper clippings, photos, anything that she could find. In addition to, she would just put a VCR tape into her VCR anytime there was a show on TV, and then tape it. And through her, I mean, we had this like incredible wealth of archival material that you could not really get anywhere else, like 90 hours of taped television from the 80s and 90s that dealt with Michelle Remembers and the Satanic Panic. And she was one person. So she, they, after the book was written, and I don't want to spoil too much, but she started looking into this. Clearly she is, you're going to meet her in the film. She is, I love Marilyn, and she is a force to be reckoned with. And there was 4 other teams of investigators, some of whom you also meet in the film, from Canada, the US, and there was one also in the UK who were also investigating the book and trying to debunk it. So it was this gradual process, because it's sort of like you mentioned at the beginning, there is no internet. Every city, every town has their own newspaper, their own radio station, their own TV station. So to have something that was to debunk it on the stage that it needed to around the world, it just took like over a decade to do it.
Wow. Amazing. I'm fascinated by the documentary process, because you gather all these things, but then how do you go about sifting through all the bits to put together kind of a coherent narrative that an audience can understand and digest in a 90-minute runtime?
I mean, it's a lot of research, and Sean, you can attest to this, but like it was a lot of like pre-interviews, talking to these people, developing relationships with a lot of the subjects, and getting them to trust us with their story. And you would do that over a long period of time, and you would begin to kind of see what the story threads would be as you spoke to them. One, like Teresa, Larry's daughter, who's in the film, we didn't actually interview her until we were about 4 or 5 months into editing. And so like inserting her story into this like cut that was almost ready, we weren't sure if we were going to get the interview, was like a super tricky time. and a big headache. But bringing her into the film was so important and just gave the film a completely different nuance.
And Gwen, I can give you some more secrets too. So, there are a lot of documentary filmmakers who will shoot a lot of things and take it to an editor and then find the story in the edit. I am not one of those people. I'm sorry. I know it's like a magic thing about documentary. However, that just makes me so stressed out and gives me gets my heart going right now just talking about it. I'm like like it's called a beat sheet, where you take, after you've done all your research and done all the interviews, you actually sit down and work out, this is what the story could look like on paper, and then it's a collaboration with an editor to go through and be like, does the structure make sense? Can we find all these supporting bits? An archive producer, on and on and on it goes through the list. But it is always prepare. That's all I have to say. I'm like, you won't regret it.
It seems like kind of trying to form like spaghetti into a, solid shape.
Good analogy.
Oh my goodness. Were there any bits of information or discoveries that were made that surprised you during this process?
Well, one of the big things that like super surprised us was getting the therapy tape. That was something that we worked on for a really long time, and we weren't sure if we were going to get it. And again, that came like super late in the editing process. Like we were pretty much like the film was locked basically, and we got this tape, and it showed up anonymously, showed up at our doorstep, and we were like, oh my God, we actually got one. And so like looking at our entire film and figuring out how we were going to pull this tape in was like actually, I was going to say it was a real battle, but it kind of wasn't. It worked pretty seamlessly. Graham, our editor, looked at this, listened to the tape like fully through, and he's like, here's what we're going to do. And he really began to like incorporate it into the film in such a great way.
Yeah, that was all of the pieces that you pull in, all the photographs and the recordings, the videos, and interviews with people just paint this really rich picture of I don't know, like two people just kind of building their own. It seems like they've just built their own reality, and it's through some magic occultism, I guess, kind of glamored us all into believing that it was real.
Mhm.
So it's
They
a
totally
really
did.
fascinating look at all this stuff. I am wondering too, like there was a lot of fear around, um, instigated a lot of like Catholic fear, like the like Christian like church backlash against Satanism and any activity that was considered like out of the norm, or they people had sheet. I mean, I think police stations had like sheets of like signs to watch out for if your kids
Mhm.
are engaging in like satanic activities, and this continued like up through the 90s. Like as a teenager in the 90s, I remember um city hall town meetings, city meetings in our communities, like having our parents like come home with this stuff. And then there's of course the famous Jack Chick tract
Yeah.
um of the, the D&D, and the D&D leads to Satanism and witchcraft and things like that. At the same time, there's also in these time periods this growing sort of fear and anxiety around queer communities.
Mhm.
And it seems like this movement also affected the LGBTQ community quite a bit.
Yeah.
And there's not really a lot, you don't really touch on that a lot in the documentary.
This
Is that like just another facet of like that would just be too much of a sidetrack?
I think, well, we did in an indirect way. I mean, part through the research, some of the earliest newspaper clippings that we found actually were newspaper headlines calling, certain queer people in certain communities across North America Satanists,
Mm.
and that gays and lesbians, are worshiping the devil. It's like it is, single women and queer people who were primarily targeted during the Satanic Panic. And in our film, like we wanted to, there's so much that we had to leave out, but in terms of the actual Satanic Panic cases, there's, I think Vox said there was something like 12,000 around the U.S. is their unofficial number between 1980 and 1995. And the case that there's two cases that we focused on: the McMartin trial, which happened in California, and then also the Kelly Michaels trial, which was in New Jersey. And Kelly Michaels is a queer woman. And this is why we did include this, because I mean, Steve and I are queer men. This is our community. We know that they were targeted in the 80s and 90s. And Kelly Michaels is an example of really what happened when you are different from the mainstream, if you're queer or different in a different way and othered, and that people can accuse you with these rumors that are untrue, unsubstantiated, no evidence. She ended up in prison for, like, she was supposed to go to prison for 48 years, spent 5 years in prison until she was freed, all because she was a queer woman teaching young children. And it is, I mean, there's series that we have ideas for out of this film to explore this a little further. And I think somebody does need to explore this further, and especially the queer angle, because it is outrageous and maddening, and makes me furious that this happened to real people who are still alive and still dealing with this now.
Yeah. I was gonna, my follow-up question is, how do you feel like this has had long-reaching ramifications today? And in terms of, like, we see all this now focus on like banning drag queen story hour. Like, why? Like, it's just mind-boggling, the thought process behind that.
It is. I mean, the thing that we really noticed was it seems to be the cycle that happens every 30 to 40 years, and it kind of it ebbs and flows, and it peaks, and it'll just come to the forefront, and everybody will be talking about it, and then it just kind of seeds away, and then it comes back, and it's happened throughout history. And it happened 40 years ago. It's happening right now. And I think the thing that we can kind of take away from is that it's probably going to happen again. It's part of human nature. We're storytellers, and we try to explain the world around us with these stories. And Satan is one that comes up over and over and over again.
Why do you think that is? Like, why has Satan captured our imagination so strongly?
He's the easiest one to blame. I mean, you don't want to blame yourself. You can blame the devil.
Do you really want to listen to somebody being like, it's the socioeconomic conditions? Like, it's too complicated, right? Satan,
yeah.
His
Satan's
fault every
sexy.
time.
Satan is sexy. Yep. Sexy sells.
Yeah.
So oh my goodness. I guess my last question for you is, do you have any fun tidbits behind the scenes or happy accidents that happened during filming that you could share with us?
I mean, I love a good ghost story. So you'll see in the film,
yeah.
There's a scene that takes place in the crypt of a massive Anglican cathedral in Victoria, British Columbia, where the book was written. And crypts, they smell a certain way. If you've never been in a crypt, they are always dark. There's always dark corners and shadows. And we had been filming down there and broke for lunch, left a camera set up on a dolly track, raised. And when we all came back, the camera was flipped upside down, reversed on the dolly track. And
it was a big camera. It was we
huge.
had big lenses, we had a big camera. It was a big setup, and it was completely flipped.
70 pounds, hard to lift for one person to do. I don't know.
And we're all looking at it, and we're like, how could this have happened? And it just did not make sense.
Wow. No one fessed up.
It was the devil.
It was the devil. That's interesting. I guess upside down is better than smashed to bits on the ground, though.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
Lucky.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I think that this gives us all a lot of insight into the film, and for people who are watching this who have already watched the film, gives you a little bit of a deeper dive into that. And then for people who haven't watched the film yet that are watching this on our YouTube channel, go find where it's playing and go watch it. And then for Sean and Steve, is this going to have a theatrical release? What are the distribution plans for it?
Wider distribution's coming in the fall. And for people, we're still doing some theatrical screenings. So you can go to satanwantsyouFilm.com to see if it's coming to your community or somewhere near you. And then we'll share also when it's widely available for streaming there as well.
Okay, awesome. And where can people find you on social media to follow along with that?
Uh, Best place is probably Satan Wants You Film Instagram. That's where you can get a lot of updates. And then for Sean and myself, Steve J.E. Adams on Instagram, and then Sean.
Just my name that you see on the screen, at Sean Horlor. Love to talk to you about the film.
Fantastic, you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me and chatting with me about your fantastic documentary. Yeah, we're really pleased to be able to have a documentary to show in our festival and kind of round out the horror offering. So thank you so much.
Are we the only one?
Yeah, you're the
Oh,
only one.
okay.
Nice.
The only documentary on the island. So I am going to sign off. Thank you all Portland Horror Film Festival watchers and fans, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, and hail Satan.
Hail Satan.